Today, I'm going to speak on the subject of divinizing your unconscious. Now, you might think, what's so important about the unconscious? So, let me take you back to the beginning of Krishna's explanation. Bhumi apo nalo vayur kam mano buddhirev cha ahankara ityam me bhinna prakriti ashtida. So Krishna explains that earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and the ego, they are all part of our inferior intelligence. Aparayam itastvanyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhutam mahabhao yayedam dhakyate jagat. And then Krishna explains that you are part of that superior energy of mind, which is sustaining and maintaining creation. So when we come to understanding the mind, we should understand we are talking about Prakriti. We're not talking about you, the soul. We're not talking about you, the individual soul. We are talking about the mind. And the mind, being Prakriti, is entirely controlled not by you, but it is controlled by Bhagavan. What do I mean by it is controlled, not controlled by you? Krishna explains in the Bhagawad-Geeta, Mama Vamso Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana Mana Shastendriyani Prakristani Karshati. That you, the individual soul, is simply struggling to control your mind and your five senses. Why are you struggling? Because Devyasa Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratyaya Mameva Ye Prapadyante Mayamitam Tarantite. You are struggling with your mind and your five senses because this Prakriti, which is your mind and five senses, which is the source of your mind and five senses, is controlled not by you, it is controlled by God. And that is and it is the divine energy of the Lord, and therefore it is difficult or impossible for you to control it. And yet Krishna says, Mam eva ye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. When you are able to surrender this to the Lord, then you can transcend or you can cross beyond the Prakriti. We must understand something about the mind. And in understanding something about the mind, I must take you back to the Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 6, verse 5. Udaredatmanatmanam natmanam avasadyet atmaiva hi atmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratman. Now, although the word Atma is repeated many times in this verse, he is not talking about the soul. He is talking about the mind. You should understand that the word Atman, if you follow it through the Upanishads, is mentioned as Atman equal to breath. And as you go on, you understand that Atman is sometimes referred to as the mind, sometimes referred to as the self, sometimes referred to as the body. Because in Sanskrit, many of the words are used with reference to context. And here, the reference to context means that the Atman means the mind. And here, Krishna says, elevate yourself through the power of the mind. Don't degrade yourself. Because your mind can be your friend and your mind can be your enemy. It's very important because for most of us, the mind is not a friend. The mind is largely an enemy. In fact, in the Bhagavad Puran, there is a story of the Prahlad sitting on the lap of his father, Hiranyakashipu, who is explaining how powerful he is, how he has destroyed this enemy yesterday, how he has killed this enemy today, how he will kill this enemy tomorrow. And Prahlad looks at his father and says, my dear father, you have no enemy. You are deluded in thinking that this is your enemy or he is your enemy. You have no enemy other than your own uncontrolled mind. So indeed, our minds are, when they are controlled, they are our best friend. When our mind is not controlled, it's our worst enemy. Therefore, in the next verse, Bhagavad-Geeta 6.6, Krishna explains, Bandhur atma atmanastasya yena atma eva atmana jita anatmanasu shatrutve vartet atmana sattva. If you have conquered your mind, it is your best friend. If your mind is uncontrolled, your mind is your worst enemy. Therefore, the mind is a very, very important part for all those who are seeking freedom from suffering and all those who want to transcend the vicissitudes of fortune within this world. Indeed, this world, Krishna says, is dukhalayam ashashvatam. He also says this is anityam asukham lokam. It's a place of misery where everything is temporary. And not only is it a place of suffering where everything is temporary, but you cannot find lasting happiness here. Krishna also explains that Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi, Dukkha, Doshanu, Darshanam, that birth, death, old age, disease, fault, misfortune, all of these are guaranteed to everyone. Look around you, Arjun. So Arjun is being told to look around, for indeed, around you, birth, death, old age, disease, fault, misfortune, they're all guaranteed to everyone. The other point you must understand is that the mind, being Prakriti, is responsible for most of your actions. While there is some degree of won't power, you only imagine that you have willpower. It is your Prakriti which is pushing you onward towards performing actions. And why is this Prakriti pushing you onward towards actions? It doesn't absolve you from anything, because your Prakriti is created by your action. And the actions you perform create patterns within your unconscious. And this unconscious, according to the patterns that are there, then pushes you onward to perform different actions. Therefore, Krishna says, Prakriti Kriya Manani Gunai Karmani Sarvashaha Ahankara Vimudatma Kartaham Iti Manyate. So, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that Prakriti is performing all your actions. And this Prakriti which is performing all your actions, you don't understand it. So you think that you are the performer of the action. Karya karanam kartritve hetur prakriti uchyate purusha sukha dukhanam bhoktritva hetur uchyate. Very simple. All action is performed by Prakriti, and yet it is the foolish living entity, the soul, who imagines he is the doer of all actions. So therefore, I have pointed out to you earlier in my talks on the neuroscience of earth that your unconscious makes you perform actions. And that unconscious which makes you perform actions is indeed making you perform actions that have been programmed by you through your previous actions. How is that so? Krishna says, don't worry, it's very difficult even for learned people to understand. Karmano hi api bodhavyam cha vikarmana akarmanascha bodhavyam gahana karmano gati. How to perform good karma, how to perform bad karma, how to avoid bad karma, how to become free from karma. All these are very difficult to understand. But the mind, Edward de Bono has defined so elegantly, the mind is a pattern-seeking, self-organizing system. I'm repeating it for you so you can get it properly. The mind is a pattern-seeking, self-organizing system. The primary function of the mind is to figure out how to stop thinking. So mind is beautiful at recognizing patterns. And when it finds a pattern, it feels that it can now stop thinking. You see, the brain forms a very small percentage of your body weight. But although it forms a very small percentage of your body weight, it takes up almost 25% of your blood supply. Because so much energy is consumed by the brain when it thinks. And the more you use the brain for thinking, the more complex work it is forced to perform unnecessarily, and therefore you get burnout. For example, if you were to wear a shirt and you were to decide, should I put my right hand in first or should I put my left hand in first? Should I wear my trousers first or should I wear my shirt first? Should I button my tie? Should I button my shirt from the top or shall I button my shirt from the bottom? Questions, 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 choices, choices, choices. And if you were to answer so many questions and make so many choices by the time you wear your clothes, you would be burnt out and you would have to lie down. But instead, when you wear your clothes, when you have your bath, when you perform your daily activities, all that you're doing is under the dictates of the unconscious mind. Because in the unconscious mind, there are certain patterns And these patterns indeed make you perform in the same manner every time, every day. When you're driving your car or your two-wheeler from one place to another, let's say you're going to your office, as you travel, your mind may be somewhere else. You, in fact, may have to pick up something along the way, but you've forgotten about it. And your unconscious makes you drive well past the place where you were supposed to stop and pick up a loaf of bread, and you'll go straight onwards. Who is driving? Your unconscious is driving. Therefore, it is your unconscious that performs most of your actions. Indeed, if you did not have unconscious competence in performing your daily actions, you would be in tremendous stress. I've given this example before, but take a person who is learning how to drive. When they're learning how to drive, what happens? Their attention is all conscious. And because their conscious attention is on driving, they're in great stress. If you try to talk to them, they'll say, "Don't talk to me, I'm driving." But those who are driving with unconscious incompetence, with unconscious competence, are listening to the radio, simultaneously talking on the phone, munching something, eating something, making a signal with their hand, all of them, buzzing in traffic between cars, all by the unconscious mind. And as I explained to you earlier when I discussed the neuroscience of work, all work depends on the unconscious. Most of the work that you're doing depends on the unconscious. Unless you're learning, unless you're programming that unconscious. So therefore, the unconscious has an even higher function. The unconscious needs to be programmed to remember God and forget self. Self is affirmed, reconstructed, remembered, rebuilt, all by the mind's obsession with it, all by the mind's obsession with it, manifested through your wandering mind. This wandering mind I pointed out to you earlier is called the default mode network. And this default mode network is that network which helps you to constantly repair, renew, and figure out ways for your ego to be living in the world with other people around you. Therefore, it's also called the social mode network. And that is the source of your suffering. When you remember God in a manner so that you forget self, when you work in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to God, without any sense of doership, without indeed looking to something that the ego will gain as a result of performing that action, you are putting the default mode at rest. This, in terms of electrical activity and circuits in the brain, is known as the task positive network. Similarly, when you chant, your chanting puts a block on the default mode network, on the social mode network. And therefore, the number one thing you can do in order to spare yourself suffering is to work in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to God by remembering Him and forgetting self. And in your discretionary time, in the time where you have time which is free, when you're not engaged in your duties, which is similarly acting in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to God, performing the duties to your family and other duties that have been assigned to you. When you are free, chant God's name. Because chanting God's name acts like an interference pattern, which prevents this default mode from kicking in and dragging you to the ego and to suffering. Now, it's very interesting to understand this, because this gives you a way to become free. Why do we say that work is more important than chanting? Because with work, you perform and fulfill the purpose for which God has placed you in the world. You fulfill the purpose of your creation. Through your swadharma, your work, through your swadharma towards society, towards your family and society, when you are acting in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion, you are performing yajna. Yagnartharth karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sanga samachara. All actions performed as sacrifice free you from karma. All actions that are not performed for sacrifice bind you to karma. They bind you to repeated patterns of behavior, and you cannot get free from this pattern of behavior unless it is by working in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion and or chanting God's name. Now, the whole process of Bhakti Marg is that we make every occasion an excuse to remember God. Before we eat the food that is placed before us, we offer that food with love and devotion to God. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yo mad bhakta prayachati tadaham bhakti uparitam ashnami prayatatmana. A leaf, a flower, a fruit, a little bit of water. If you offer it to me with love and devotion, I consume it. But indeed, it is your ego that is consumed. It is also your ahankar is consumed. Indeed, your sense of self is consumed because you are using that moment to remember God, which automatically means forgetting self. And when you offer things to God, and you do it in everything that you are performing, yat karoshi, yad ashnasi, yat johosi, dadasi, yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat purushva madarpanam. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever charities, whatever austerities you perform, everything Krishna says, do it for me. Everything. The idea is you make remembering God into a habit. Indeed, you make remembering God into an unconscious habit. So when you sneeze, you say, Krishna. Similarly, when you yawn, similarly, before you eat the food that is given to you, before you perform any actions, you think, Krishna, I'm offering this to you. Om Tat Sat. And this constant remembrance of God, making God, remembering God becomes such a habit that ultimately it becomes part of your unconscious. So the process of bhakti is the process of indeed programming your unconscious to be absorbed in God. You program your unconscious to be absorbed in God. So that when you have programmed your unconscious in such a manner that you are constantly, habitually, unconsciously absorbed in God, then whatever happens, this is Hari Ichha. There are no good things and bad things anymore. Everything comes from God. Na rishyati, na dveshati, na sochati, na kanshati. Shubha Shubha Parityagi Yo Mad Bhakta Samay Priya. Suddenly, no one is your enemy. Everyone is an instrument of God in your life. Therefore, you hate nobody. Adveshta Sarva Bhutanam Maitra Karunya Evacha Nirmamo Nirahankara Samadukha Sukoshami. You have no negative feelings towards everybody. And indeed, you believe in being a compassionate friend towards all without any sense of ahankar or ego. You are situated in divinity and you are constantly at peace. And since you believe that whatever is happening now is happening by the will of God, who is now pervaded your unconscious, you will believe and you will feel, you will experience that everything in your life is perfect. Santushta satatam yogi yatatma drida nishchaya mayar pita mano buddhir yo mad bhaktah same priya. You're always content, but constantly endeavoring with great determination, with your mind and intelligence absorbed and surrendered in God. So also when you finish chanting the requisite number of names of God, the chanting of the names of God will go on continuously in your unconscious. It's very important to understand. Japa is programming your unconscious. A japa jap is the unconscious chanting God's name. And if you are chanting God's name and programming the unconscious, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Iti Shok Dashakam Nam Nam Kali Kalmashunasanam Nata Paratarapaya Sarva Vedesha. All the wisdom of all the scriptures will be yours. You will be directly connected with God. And because you are chanting constantly when you are conscious, this will become part of your unconscious chanting. So chanting or japa is programming your unconscious with God's name. And a japa jap is the fruit, which is the unconscious, which is chanting God's name automatically as a habit, so that, in fact, your monkey mind does not trouble you and cause you suffering. So divinize your unconscious. It is the root of all your behavior. It is the root of all your thought. And the way to do that is to offer everything to God. And then you will truly see Him everywhere. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam chamai pashyati tasyaham na pranashyami na sacha me pranashyati. If you see me in all things and all things within me, you will never be lost to me, nor will I ever be lost to you. You will realize that God is directing you onward towards your destiny. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridedeshe arjuna tistati brahmyan sarva bhutani yantararudani maya. God will be seated in your heart and He will drive you onward towards your destiny. You will be merely seated in this machine made of material energy. And you will be constantly at peace because you will be surrendered to Him. Tam eva sharanam gaccha sarva bhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantin sthanam prakshashi shastra. So the whole process of the Bhagavad-Gita, the whole process is, how do I divinize my life? How do I do everything for Krishna? How do I chant His name to fill my mind and my thoughts? How do I offer my actions to Him in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion? How do I make my whole life a meditation upon Him? And the secret of that is when you can program your unconscious so that your unconscious then will constantly keep absorbed in you. So I will pause here. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
I'll start with the first question. Sir, why do we feel insecure when we do not find patterns or
I
similarities?
can't hear you properly.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, but speak slowly because there's something wrong with your mic.
Sure. So I was saying, why do we feel insecure when we do not find patterns or similarities in our day-to-day lives?
See, the mind is a pattern-seeking, self-organizing system. And since the mind is a pattern-seeking, self-organizing system, you are simply a victim of the mind. But when you are constantly remembering God, by remembering God, you are absorbed in Him. And that absorption in God will take away all insecurities, all fears, all depression.
Absolutely, sir. So, how can one take the first step, sir, to get the awareness of breaking this cycle?
I told you, you do it one by offering everything that you're doing to God in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion without seeking any fruits, without thinking that you are the doer. And also, when you have time, which you will have because nearly half of our day is spent in waiting for this or waiting for that, chant God's name. As you become more convinced, spend 2 hours chanting God's name in the morning and 2 hours chanting God's name in the evening. And you will see results when you start doing that within 15 days.
Definitely, sir. So, these were our questions for this session, and you have already answered most of the doubts of this session. So, thank you so much for the session, sir.
Hare Krishna, Jai Shri Krishna, Hari Om.
Jai Shri Krishna, sir. Thank you so much.